You wake before dawn. As you always do, the air is still, heavy with the hush of early morning. Outside your window, the sky over the English countryside is the pale gray of ash, and the fields beyond are still sleeping under a light frost. You sit at the edge of your narrow bed, the wooden frame creaking beneath you, and rub your hands together to chase away the cold. Another quiet day ahead, or so you think. There's a letter on the kitchen table. It wasn't there last night. It rests unopened, slightly askew. The paper yellowed slightly from its journey. The envelope bears the seal of the War Office. You already know what it is. Your husband's name, George, is written neatly on the back in careful cursive. And beside it, your name, Margaret Holloway. The ink is too steady, too formal. George didn't write it. Someone else did. You hold it between your fingers, hesitate, then slowly tear it open. The paper inside rustles softly like dried leaves. Dear Mrs. Holloway, we regret to inform you. Your breath catches. The kitchen tilts slightly around you. Or maybe it's just your heart, sinking through the floor. You don't cry. You don't scream. Instead, you fold the letter in half, and then in half again, and tuck it into your apron pocket. Outside, the kettle begins to whistle. Your story is not extraordinary. Not in the eyes of the world. Thousands, millions of women will receive similar letters in the coming years. But in the hush of this moment, your world has shifted. One life ended somewhere far away in a place you'll never see. And yours has suddenly become something else. You are not alone. In small towns across Britain, across France, across Russia, women are waking up to lives without fathers, brothers, lovers, husbands, and they will not be called soldiers. Though their lives are now a kind of battle, they will not be given medals, though many will carry more than any man in uniform ever did. You walk to the cupboard and reach for the tin of tea. There's hardly any left. Rationing has gotten worse, but you make a cup anyway, one for you, and one for the empty chair across the table. His chair, you used to joke about how it creaked under his weight, how it needed fixing. Now it creaks under silence. You sip your tea slowly, watching the light change. You hear the sound of footsteps on the gravel path outside. A familiar knock on the door follows. It's Ethel from down the road, her long coat pulled tight around her. She sees your face and stops short. It came, she asks quietly. You nod once. She steps forward and holds you in a tight, brief hug. Not the kind of hug meant to fix anything, just the kind that says, I know. I understand. I've been there. You walk together to the church hall. It's where they've set up the local relief center, and where the women gather now that the men are gone. You sweep the floors. You serve stew to children whose mothers are working long shifts at the munitions factory. You fold donated clothes, sew missing buttons, patch torn sleeves. It isn't glamorous, and no one applauds. But this is the front line now. A woman you don't know very well. Lena sits quietly in a chair near the window. She's staring into her lap. You notice her hands are shaking. You sit beside her, neither of you saying a word. Eventually she turns to you and says, almost in a whisper, I haven't heard from him in months. You nod. You know the silence is a kind of message. 2. That night, you lie in bed and run your hands across the cotton of the pillowcase where his head once rested. You imagine the trench where he fell, Was it raining? Was it quick? Was he thinking of you? But there's no answer. So you do what women have always done. You carry on. You tend the garden. You help rebuild the roof after the air raid. You teach the neighbor's boy to read while his mother is at the factory. You do not stop, because stopping feels like surrender. And there's no room for that anymore. The war might be fought with guns, but it is endured with hands like yours. There's a new rhythm to the town now. The streets are filled with the clatter of carts, the bark of orders from women in uniforms who never imagined they'd wear one. The smell of grease and smoke rises from the factory down the road, where Ethel now works assembling aircraft parts. She comes home with grime on her hands and tired eyes, but she smiles when she sees you. It's not much, but it's something. And then one day, word spreads an American convoy has arrived nearby. Supplies, mail, hope. You and the others walk to the train station. Some carry signs, others carry pies. You don't carry anything. You just want to see faces that aren't worn down by grief. The soldiers are young. So young, barely older than your son would be. You look at them and wonder which of them won't make it home. Which of them will leave behind women who will sit in quiet kitchens with unopened letters. You smile at one of them. He tips his hat. You keep walking. In the weeks to come, you'll write letters not for yourself, but for neighbors who cannot read or write. You'll visit the elderly who no longer have sons to care for them. You'll plant potatoes where flowers used to grow. You'll save every scrap, every coin, every bit of hope, and no one will call you brave. No one will tell your story, but you'll be there, behind the scenes, holding 1,000 small pieces of a broken world together. And that is courage. Not loud, not celebrated, but quiet, enduring, and deeply human. The air in the munitions factory is thick hot, dry, and always carrying the acrid scent of oil and powder. It clings to your skin like a second skin. So even when you wash your hands at the end of the shift, the smell stays with you. It gets into your hair, your clothes, your breath. You try not to notice anymore. No one complains. Not really. You tie your scarf around your head the same way every day now. You don't know if it's to keep the dust out of your hair or to protect your mind from thinking too much. It started as a necessity. Now it's a habit. Like showing up before dawn. Like not asking too many questions. You weren't trained for this. None of you were. You were trained to keep a house, raise children, keep quiet. But now, your hands, once soft from laundry water and bread dough, tighten bolts on the belly of a bomber. You work beside girls who used to be shopkeepers, typists, school teachers. You exchange glances. You share tea. You don't always speak. The noise is too loud anyway. There's a rhythm to it. The clang and hiss of metal, the click of machinery, the thud of boots moving in tired unison. You lose track of hours, sometimes days. Your world becomes one of rivets and tools, of heat and motion, of minds focused on anything but fear. There's no time for grief here. Not in this place. One girl, Betty, is only 17. She's small, quiet, and her sleeves are always rolled too high. She sings softly when she works. Little things, nursery rhymes, bits of songs from the radio, old folk tunes. You don't know whether it comforts her or if it's a tether, something to remind her of a world before this one. One day, Her fingers slip, and the tool sparks, just a little. No one is hurt, but the supervisor yells. She doesn't cry. She just whispers, "Sorry," and keeps working. You catch her eye later and offer a piece of chocolate from your ration. She breaks off half and puts the rest back in your hand. That's how it works. Now everything's shared, even the smallest kindness. It's not just work that binds you all together, it's silence. A shared, mutual understanding that the world outside has grown too loud and too cruel. Inside the walls of the factory, your grief is your own. You carry it in your spine, your shoulders, your calloused fingers. No one needs to say they've lost someone. You see it in the way they stop laughing too quickly or stare just a second too long at an empty lunch table. But something strange happens over time. You get stronger. Your arms harden. Your feet stop aching. You begin to move like you belong here. You don't notice when your posture shifts. When you speak a little louder, stand a little straighter, and no one calls you beautiful anymore. You're something else, now something sharper, worn down, but solid, like steel. There's a woman named Ruth in your section. She's older, maybe in her 40s, with a face carved from worry and wisdom. She used to be a nurse in the Great War. She never talks about it, but you can see the way her eyes scan a room, always measuring danger, always looking for someone to help. She shows you how to wrap your hands before lifting heavy parts, how to breathe when the dizziness comes, how to close your eyes and count 10 slow seconds when the noise gets too much. You ask her once, quietly, why she came back to this kind of life. She says, because someone has to, because not all uniforms come with medals. You don't forget that. Some nights, you return home too tired to eat. Your fingernails are black with soot. Your back aches in places you didn't know existed. You remove your boots like armor, and the silence of the house settles around you. Sometimes you hear planes overhead ours. Theirs, you don't always know. The sound doesn't scare you anymore. Just reminds you of what's waiting beyond the sky. You sit by the window. It's dark, but you don't light a lamp. You just watch. You imagine George's hands. What he'd think if he saw yours now strong, cracked, stained. You wonder if he'd recognize the woman you've become. One evening, during the shift change, there's a blackout drill. The factory floor goes dark. Someone near you shrieks a raw, animal sound, and for a moment, the world feels fragile again. You reach for a hand in the darkness. It's warm, trembling. Someone finds the emergency light. The moment passes. Afterward, no one speaks of it. But you feel something shift between you all. As if the silence between women isn't emptiness, it's shelter. The factory receives a letter from the ministry. They're sending a photographer to document the brave women on the home front. The supervisor lines you all up awkwardly. You don't smile. No one does. You stand with your shoulders squared and eyes forward. The flash goes off. The next week, your face is in the local paper. Your name isn't. Later, you will laugh about it with the others. Over weak tea and dry biscuits, you'll read the headline, "Heroines of Industry, Britain's Backbone." It will feel hollow, but you'll save the page anyway. Fold it carefully and slip it between the pages of your Bible, next to George's last letter. Because even if they forget your name, you will not forget this time. These days when your body was tired but your purpose was clear. When the world was breaking, and you helped hold it together, not with speeches or parades, but with your two steady hands. And when this war ends, because it must, you don't know what will happen next. Whether you'll return to kitchens and dresses and polite silence, whether the world will remember who kept it running when the men were gone, but deep down, a quiet hope grows in you. Not for medals, not for thanks, just for a world where your daughter, or your niece, or some stranger's granddaughter, won't have to be brave in the same way. Not because she can't, but because she won't have to. The post arrives on Tuesdays and Fridays, though no one dares to count on it anymore. The war has made time unpredictable. Some letters come months late. Some never come at all. But still, you wait. It's Friday. You hear the clatter of the postman's boots outside, and your heart does the same small flutter it has done for months. You open the door before he knocks. His eyes are kind but tired. You exchange no more than a nod. There's nothing for you today. He hands you one letter addressed to the woman next door and Pembroke, the widow whose son shipped off to Africa. You accept it carefully, as if the weight of the envelope might give away the contents. Inside your home, the absence of news feels louder than any message. No updates, no apologies, no closure, just silence. Again, you place the letter on Mrs. Pembroke's porch, knock gently, and leave, back when George was stationed in France. His letters came weekly, sometimes just 2 or 3 lines scribbled between trenches and damp nights. But it was enough. They weren't love letters, not in the traditional sense. They were more like anchors. He'd write, "Rain again. Rations down. Someone found a harmonica. I think about your bread." You'd read it 5 times before you slept. You never replied with grand words either. You told him about the garden, about ration stamps, about your neighbor's dog who always barked at nothing. But the words mattered. They made war feel smaller, more human, less like a monster and more like something you could survive. Not everyone has someone to write to. At the church hall, you've started writing letters for others. It began with Mrs. Leary, whose hands shake too much to hold a pen. She'd lost her husband in the Great War and now has 2 sons in this one. She dictates while you write. Her voice is firm, but her eyes tell you she's scared. You don't add your own thoughts. Even when you want to, you don't soften her words or hide her worry. You just write, "Dear Thomas, I hope you have clean socks. I worry about your feet. Your brother would say I always did. Tell me you're eating enough. Don't lie. I'll know." You hand her the finished letter, and she holds it to her chest like a relic. Some days, the women bring you letters they've received and don't know how to read. You hold the thin, folded paper in your hands and try to prepare your voice. Sometimes it's good news. Sometimes it's not. You've learned to pause before reading the bad ones. You look at the woman's face. You check her breathing. You sit close. You never read those alone. There's a girl named Marianne, barely 20, whose fiancé is stationed in North Africa. She brings you a crumpled envelope one afternoon, her fingers trembling. You open it gently. It's a short letter. The handwriting isn't his. We regret to inform you, you don't read it out loud. You place it back in the envelope and take her hand. She knows. After Marianne leaves, you stay seated at the table for a long time. The window is open, The wind stirs the curtains. The sky has turned pale with dusk. You think of how many women sit in kitchens just like yours, holding papers they never wanted. There are things a letter can't say. It can't describe the moment a life ends in a field far from home. It can't capture the weight of a final breath, or the smell of the earth around it. It can't tell you if he thought of you in the end. But still, you wait for them. You cling to them. You keep them in tins and books and boxes under beds. Because words are all that remain when bodies don't come home. One evening, a letter comes from a soldier you've never met. It's addressed to whom it may concern. Inside is a single sheet of lined paper. If you're reading this, I probably didn't make it. I don't know who you are, but I wanted to say thank you. I was scared, but I wasn't alone. That matters. Private W. J. Mercer, you don't know how it ended up in your post. You don't know who sent it on, but you fold it carefully and place it in your drawer. That night, you can't sleep. In the months that follow, the letter-writing table becomes a quiet refuge. Women come to sit, to speak, to wait. You start keeping spare paper and stamps in a small box, along with extra tea. Sometimes, no one writes. They just sit. And that's enough. You start recording names for those who have no one else to remember them. The ones who died and left no children. The ones who returned and said nothing. You write them in a small notebook. No one asked you to, but it feels important. Some of the names you underline twice. Those are the ones who never got to say goodbye. One morning, you receive a letter from George's cousin Henry. He served in the same unit. You open it with hands that almost refuse to move. Inside, it says this. He was in good spirits. He'd just finished writing you a letter. I think he had hope. He didn't suffer. He was still smiling. You don't cry. You place the letter next to George's last. And for the first time in weeks, you breathe deeply. Not relief. Not closure. Just breath. It's enough. That evening, you sit with your own letter, pen in hand. You don't know who it's for. Maybe your future self. Maybe someone else. Maybe no one at all. But you write, Dear love, the world is still here. The sky turns soft tonight, and the trees are blooming again. I planted onions in the garden. I think you'd laugh at that. I miss you, but I'm still here, and I'm still trying. That matters, doesn't it? You fold it carefully and place it with the others. A record, a memory, a promise. You see her on a Monday morning, stepping off the back of a lorry with a duffel bag over one shoulder and a cap pulled low over her brow. She looks out of place among the soft fields and crooked chimneys of your small English town. Her boots are polished. Her uniform is neat. Her posture says she's not here for a visit. You're standing outside the post office when she arrives. She meets your eyes for only a second, but something in that glance is familiar. Worn, watchful. Later that day, you find out her name is Josephine Clark, but most call her Jo. She's with the Auxiliary Territorial Service, what they're calling Women's Army Support. She's to be stationed nearby, working signals and logistics for the new training base outside town. It's the first time you've seen a woman in proper uniform outside of a nurse's role. She doesn't seem interested in drawing attention, but she already has. You meet Jo properly 2 days later, when she comes to the church hall asking for directions. The ladies inside fall quiet when she enters. All gray dresses and powder-dusted sleeves next to her olive green. She doesn't flinch, doesn't smile too much. Just waits patiently while someone brings you forward. You take her outside, pointing the way toward the base. You expect her to thank you and walk on. Instead, she lingers. Used to be a school, didn't it? She asks, gesturing to the red brick building in the distance. You nod. Before the war. Strange, she says, adjusting the strap of her bag. The place's war takes over. You don't have a clever reply, just a silence that feels like agreement. In the weeks that follow, you begin to see her more. At the ration line, at the train station, once coming out of the bakery with a bag of flour cradled in one arm like a child, always alone, always quiet. Some of the women in town whisper about her. Some admire her. Others are wary. She should be at home, not wearing boots like a man. You hear one say, "Poor girl probably had no one left to keep her home." Another murmurs. You don't say anything, but you find yourself walking beside Joe more often than not. You talk about the weather, about tea shortages, about the new knitting patterns the Red Cross handed out. One day, she looks at your hands, calloused, strong, stained with grease and garden soil, and says, "You could have worn a uniform." You know. You laugh. Too old. Too needed here. But for the first time, you wonder what it would have been like. Joe doesn't tell stories about the front, but she lets things slip sometimes. About how she learned Morse code in 2 weeks flat. About the woman in her last unit who caught shrapnel in the back and kept typing until she passed out. About the days when nothing makes sense and no orders come through, and they sit in silence listening to static and waiting for answers that don't arrive. You get used to it, she says one evening. You both know you never really do. One rainy morning, Joe knocks on your door. She's soaked, shivering slightly, her cap tucked under one arm. "Sorry to barge in," she says, "but I'm on standby and the canteen's closed, and I remembered you made decent tea." You smile and step aside. She sits at your kitchen table like she's done it 100 times before. You hand her a mug, and she wraps her fingers around it like it holds more than heat. "I had a sister," she says quietly, after a long silence. "She married a sailor. Last letter came from somewhere near Norway. Nothing since." You don't press. You know how easily stories can crumble when handled too roughly. She was the brave one. Joe adds, you glance at her boots, her uniform, the streak of dirt on her cheek. "I doubt that." You say, that evening, you walk her back to the edge of the base. Along the way, she tells you about the coded messages they process, strange sequences of letters that mean life or death. How sometimes a delay of seconds changes everything. They don't teach you how to feel about that, she says. No, you think. They never do. The next time you see her, she's standing at the railway station, watching a line of boys board a train in silence. Barely men, most of them. Faces pale with nerves. Some try to joke. Most don't. Joe doesn't say a word. She just watches. After the train disappears around the bend, she turns to you. "I hate sending them," she says. "Even if I know where they're going. Even if I know it has to be done." You nod. "We all send someone, one way or another." She sighs. a long breath that carries too many names. In the final days of her posting, she comes to your house with a parcel. "Found this in a shop near the coast," she says. "Thought you'd like it. It's a pair of soft wool gloves, plain, sturdy, warm, for the mornings." She adds. You try to thank her, but she waves it off. No need. It's not the grand gestures that keep us going, just keeping each other warm. When she leaves, you don't cry. You wave. You walk home. You place the gloves on the shelf near your coat and imagine the road she's on now, radio static. Cold wind, a mess tin full of weak stew, and somewhere in the dark, another woman listening, typing, waiting, carrying a quiet burden. Joe will be forgotten by history, like most of you. No paredes, no statues, no lines in textbooks. But you'll remember. You'll remember the boots in the hallway, and the tea gone cold, and the quiet voice that spoke of courage, as if it was something ordinary. Because for women like her, and like you, it was. It begins with a knock at your door, not urgent, but expectant. You open it to find Reverend Ainsley, shoulders hunched in the wind, his overcoat dotted with soft English drizzle. He isn't smiling, which is unusual for him. "Forgive the intrusion, Margaret," he says. "But they're looking for someone who can keep quiet and keep steady. And your name came up." You blink. For what? He glances over his shoulder, as if someone might be listening, then lowers his voice. "It's to do with typing, sorting, things of that sort. At the old manor house out by Waverley. You've heard whispers about Waverley House. The gates have been locked since the war began. The windows covered, and the locals avoid it like fog on a cliff road. But rumors have grown louder. Talk of radios. Strange visitors. Women who don't return home until after dark. One boy swears he saw someone burn a pile of papers in the garden at dawn. You nod. Not yes. Not no. Just a nod that means, I'll think about it. 2 days later, you're walking through the iron gates of Waverley House with a satchel under your arm and your gloves tucked neatly into your coat pocket. Inside, the air smells of ink, smoke, and old stone. You're taken through narrow halls and past locked doors. A tall woman in a pressed skirt suit introduces herself as Miss Carver. Her hair is pinned tightly at the nape of her neck, and her voice has the clipped precision of someone who has no time for idle thoughts. She says, "You'll begin tomorrow. You will speak of nothing you see or hear here. Not to neighbors, not to family, not even to God, if he asks." There is a pause. You nod again. Your job is simple on the surface. You sit in a long room with 36 other women. All of you face typewriter. You receive pages filled with letters, nonsense. It seems at first glance, rows and rows of gibberish. EQRZ, Saïf LBM, and so on. You type them out, carefully, accurately, over and over. At first, you don't understand the purpose. Then you hear the faint clicking from the room next door machine sounds. Deliberate and mechanical, the word cipher comes up in hushed conversation. You begin to understand that your hands are helping untangle the war. You are not just typing, you are listening in. One afternoon, Miss Carver hands you a short sheet. It's marked urgent in red pencil. You type it quickly and pass it along the chain. By the end of the day, The sheet is gone. The next morning, the local paper reports a U-boat destroyed in the North Sea. You don't know if it's connected, but in your gut, you think, maybe you're not allowed to ask questions. Not about what you type, not about where the messages come from, not about what happens to the information once it leaves your hands. But you learn to read silences. You learn that when the girl next to you, Louise, tightens her jaw after reading a page, something terrible has happened. You learn that when Miss Carver clutches a telegram a moment longer than usual, something has gone wrong. And you learn that every woman in that room carries her own quiet terror. Some lost brothers, some lost sweethearts. One lost her child in the first bombing of London. But none of you speak of those losses during the shift. You type, you check your spelling, you sip cold tea, and then you go home. But even home is different now. The words don't stop. They trail behind you in dreams. Your fingers twitch at night as if still striking keys. You wake to the sound of imagined Morse code, tapping on the inside of your skull. And you say nothing, because to speak, it would be to betray something sacred, something real. Your silence is part of the work. On Sundays, the room is still. No typing, no decoding, but many of you come anyway, sitting at the tables just to rest your hands on the keys like a pianist finding comfort in the weight of her instrument. Louise brings scones once, dry and heavy, but shared gladly. No one talks of war, only of weather and flowers, and once a joke about the colonel with the crooked mustache. And laughter, short and rare, blooms like the first daffodils in spring. One night, you stay late. There's a page no one else will finish. You volunteer, though your eyes are heavy and your back is sore. As you type, your candle flickers. The only sound is your fingers and the faint breathing of the building around you. You glance down at the page rows of meaningless letters. Then suddenly, 2 words break through. Not gibberish, but names. Names, you know. Holloway, Pembroke. Your breath holds. You scan again, heart quickening. It could be coincidence, or it could mean something. You hesitate, then slowly finish the page. Fold it, and pass it along as instructed. You say nothing. The next day, Mrs. Pembroke finds a letter in her box. She doesn't knock on your door. But later that afternoon, you see her walking to the churchyard with her coat wrapped tight and her chin lifted high. She passes you without a glance. She doesn't cry. You don't ask. Some things are too sacred to name. Your time at Waverley continues like this. Type. Breathe. Don't ask. The world outside grows colder. The headlines sharper. But inside those stone walls, the women keep working. Unraveling a war they will never be remembered for. A war they help win, not with weapons, but with silence and skill. Years from now, people will speak of generals and maps and treaties. They won't mention the room where you sat, the room full of secrets. But you will remember, it begins with a sound like thunder, but closer, too close. Not the slow, distant grumble of a storm rolling in, but the sharp, metallic tearing of the sky itself. You look up from your book as the windows rattle. You know the sound by now. The Blitz has come again. London burns. You're not in the capital, but you visited twice before the war and once since it began, when you delivered packages to a cousin near Clapham. You remember the strange stillness on the train ride in. The platform darkened. The city wrapped in grey cloth. You remember the holes in the buildings, the blackened brick, the fire-marked staircases that led to nowhere. But what stays with you most is the look in the eyes of the women, like they'd stopped blinking, like they were watching something that never ended. The night it comes nearest to your town, the siren howls just past midnight, a scream of brass and air that slices your sleep in half. You dress quickly, coat over nightgown, boots unlaced, and run to the shelter with the rest of the village. Your feet remember the way. So do your hands, holding the lamp, the bag of essentials, the tin of biscuits you always bring and never eat. In the shelter, people wait in a hush that isn't quite silence. You hear the soft crying of children, the low whispers of prayer, the clink of worry in every breath. And beside you is Mrs. Leary, clutching her grandson's coat and muttering names under her breath. Names you suspect are long gone. The ground trembles, just faintly. But it's enough. The next morning, the smoke is still in the air. You emerge from the shelter with your heart tight, your steps slow. A building on the far side of the village has been struck one of the old warehouses. Empty for months. No one was inside. You all call it luck. You don't say what you really think. Next time, it might not be empty. The children play in the ash without realizing what it is. You watch them run through clouds of yesterday's terror, and part of you envies their innocence. The rest of you mourns it. The town changes after that night. More windows are boarded. More roofs patched hastily. Buckets of sand appear near doorways. Women carry water not just for cooking now, but for flames that might rise at any hour. And you start sleeping in your boots. Just in case. Your friend Ethel, who works at the aircraft factory, comes by with bruises on her hands. Not from machines, but from digging she was helping clear rubble at a bombed home in the next town over. She says a girl had been trapped in the cellar, alive. They pulled her out, coughing, her hands covered in chalk dust and blood. Ethel doesn't cry as she tells you this. She just places a cracked teacup on your table and says, "This was hers. I thought you might fix it." You don't ask why. You wash the teacup carefully, and you mend the handle with old glue and linen thread. It's not perfect, but it's whole. That night, you place it on the shelf with your own, a reminder. More trains arrive each week now, bringing evacuees from the cities, small children with paper tags pinned to their coats and gas masks slung over their shoulders like lunch bags. You volunteer to house one, a girl named Elsie, age 9. She doesn't speak for 2 days. Then she asks if your kitchen window ever blows out. You tell her, gently, that it hasn't. Yet, she nods like she already knew the answer. Elsie is frightened of the dark. You leave the lamp burning low in her room. She doesn't like loud noises either. The whistle of the kettle makes her flinch. So you start boiling water in a pot instead. You learn her rhythms. She lines up her shoes before bed. She counts the buttons on her coat each morning. She chews her food slowly, as if rationing even her own chewing. But slowly, she opens. One afternoon, you find her drawing a picture on the back of a flour sack. A house, a cat, a window with curtains. My old room, she says quietly. It's not there anymore. You nod. Draw it anyway. It still lives in you. She doesn't answer, but she draws another window. At the church hall, the women organize a drive for blankets. Many are worn thin, patched and faded. You sit on the floor with others, sewing warmth into scraps of old cloth. No one talks about raids that week, but every time a plane passes overhead, the needles pause. One night, the radio announces another heavy bombing in the East End of London. You listen to the static between words and imagine faces behind the headlines. Somewhere, another woman is reaching for her child beneath the rubble. Somewhere, a girl like Elsie is watching her home disappear. You turn the dial down and place your hand on the table, steadying yourself. Then you rise and walk to the back room. You open the old trunk and begin pulling out sheets, spare socks, tins you've hidden away. You prepare for the next ones who will come. Because they will. They always do. At sunrise, you and Elsie walk to the edge of the field. The sky is soft with fog, but peaceful. You pick wildflowers, place them in a cracked pitcher by the window. You don't know why. Just that beauty still matters, especially when the world is breaking. Elsie asks you, will it end soon? You look at her. You don't lie. I don't know. She nods. I think we'll still be here when it does. You smile. I think you're right. And when you walk back inside, smoke still hangs faintly in the air. The bombs are not falling now, but their weight remains in the creak of every floorboard, in the hush of every breath. But the roof is still standing. The kettle still warms, and the girl still draws windows. You first hear about the switchboard from a nurse named Alma. She comes into the church hall one afternoon with mud on her hem and the breathless energy of someone who has been running since dawn. She drinks her tea in one gulp, then says to no one in particular, they're asking for women with sharp ears and steady hands. You ask her what for. The wires, she says. Telephony. Messages in and out of the base. Command needs more operators. You look down at your hands. They are cracked, stained with ink and oil. Steady, yes, but sharp ears. You're not sure. You've spent months listening for bombs and sirens. Not voices, but something inside you stirs. You've written the words, typed the codes, delivered the blankets, held the silence. Now, you want to listen. The training is short. You're handed a headset, a clipboard, and a quick lesson on the fragile anatomy of the telephone exchange. There are cords, plugs, and blinking lights that flicker like anxious eyes. You learn the rhythm. Call, connect, log. Then again, and again. You sit in a narrow room with 6 other women. The air smells of dust and old wires. The voice on the line is often crackled, hurried, clipped by distance and danger. You never know who you're connecting: an officer, a soldier, someone with trembling news. You're not allowed to ask. You're barely allowed to breathe. But you hear everything. On your first full shift, you patch through a message from a naval command to a hospital on the coast. The voice is low, grim. 3 casualties. No names yet. The nurse on the other end whispers, "We'll be ready." You unplug, log it, sit still for a moment. No one looks up, because everyone hears something they weren't meant to. Over time, the voices begin to repeat. You recognize some Captain Wells, who always says, "Much obliged." Sergeant Baker, Who whistles when he's nervous? There's a man from the ministry who breathes heavily between words, like he's always just run upstairs. You don't know their faces, but their voices become familiar, almost like neighbors. There's comfort in that, until one day, a voice you've heard for weeks doesn't call again. You don't ask why. You already know. You learn to move quickly. A delay in connecting a line could mean a missed order, or worse. You fumble only once, early on. When your hands hesitate on the cord, the call drops. Next time, your supervisor says, someone could die. You don't fumble again. Sometimes, the line stays open a second longer than it should. You hear more than you're supposed to. Tell her I'll write if I can. Can't feel my toes, but I'm still standing. He's gone. Sir, he was right beside me. You don't write these things down, but they live in your chest, behind your ribs, like a second heartbeat. You learn how to carry them. There's a girl on the switchboard team named Clarice. She's 17 and has a memory like a photograph. She can connect a dozen calls in a minute and still remember every word said. One day, she stares at her lap for 5 full minutes. No blinking lights, no movement. Clarice, you whisper. She holds up a letter. My brother, she says. He's gone. You reach over and squeeze her hand beneath the desk, where no one can see. She doesn't cry. Neither do you. But you sit together in the quiet hum of cables and wait for your hands to stop shaking. Outside, the war rages. But in this room, the war is voices routed, guided, connected by women who no one sees. You carry secrets like breadcrumbs across the lines. You become both bridge and ghost. On a quiet morning in early spring, you take a call meant for command. The line is brittle. The voice is American. We've broken through near the Rhine. Light resistance. Holding position. You repeat it back slowly, making sure. There is silence. Then the voice says, almost gently, you sound tired. You blink. So do the lights. You say, aren't we all? And he chuckles just once before the line goes dead. That night, you walk home in a fog. The fields are quiet. The stars are scattered like dust. In the distance, a dog barks once, then goes still. Inside, the fire is low. You boil water, pour a cup of weak tea, and sit by the radio. They say little. The fighting continues. But something in that voice from the Rhine sticks with you. A sliver of light, a corner turned. Maybe you keep the clipboard from that day. Not the official one, just the scrap where you wrote the name of the unit, the hour, the phrase light resistance. You slip it into your drawer, between old ration books and the gloves Joe gave you. A reminder. Sometimes war is wires, and women listening. You always thought hospitals were quiet places, gentle, orderly, and filled with the scent of flowers and linen. But war hospitals are never quiet. They hum with urgency. The rustle of fabric, the squeak of wheels on tile, the whispered moans of pain that ripple beneath the surface like waves under ice. There's always something moving, always someone waiting, always a breath being held. Somewhere, when you walk through the front doors of St. Bridget's War Relief Hospital, the first thing you notice is the smell. It isn't antiseptic. It's human flesh, sweat, iodine, smoke, and beneath it all, the metallic ghost of blood. You've come to help, not as a doctor, not even as a trained nurse, but as one of the dozens of women volunteering for what they call auxiliary duties, the invisible hands that hold the edges of care. You've sewn bandages before, sent parcels, boiled linens. But this is different. This is the breath of war. Too close to ignore. The ward they send you to is the convalescent one, the place where the healing is supposed to happen. But the word feels like a hope more than a fact. Men lie in narrow beds, lined in rows. Some are wrapped in gauze like mummies. Others stare up at the ceiling with eyes too old for their youth. You see the same kinds of wounds again and again: burns, amputations, shrapnel, infected lungs from gas, and behind all of it, silence. Not because there is no pain, but because there is too much of it to name. You're paired with a woman named Elspeth, a nurse from Vienna who fled to England before the war began. Her accent is sharp, her eyes sharper, and she never stops moving. She teaches you quickly. Hold the tray steady. They've lost enough already. Don't spill their tea. Change the dressing slowly. Don't startle them. Don't ask them what they saw. Don't tell them it's going to be all right. Just be there. You obey. You observe, and you begin to understand the courage it takes not to look away. One afternoon, a boy is brought in barely 17, with a face barely touched by whiskers and a hollow space where his left leg should be. He doesn't speak. Not at first. You help lift him onto the cot, your arms trembling from the weight, not of his body, but of the grief that hangs in the room like fog. Later, you bring him soup. You place it on the tray without a word. You don't expect him to speak, but he does, very softly. Do you think it will grow back? You freeze, and then say the only honest thing you can. No, but you will. He looks at you, and something flickers in his eyes. Pain, yes, but also the first trace of belief. You don't forget that look. You learn that some wounds are louder than others. The man in bed 9 screams every night. You've never heard words, only a low, strangled noise like a wolf caught in a trap. Elsbeth says he wakes up believing he's still under fire. You sit with him once during a bad night. You don't touch him. You just speak softly. It's not there. You're here. You made it. Eventually, the screaming quiets. You don't tell anyone you cried afterward in the stairwell. Letters arrive in bundles, most unopened. Some returned. One soldier tears his apart as soon as it touches his hands. Another reads the same one every morning like a prayer. One day, a package arrives for a man who died the night before. Inside, socks, a tin of toffee, a photo of a girl holding a bicycle. You repack it. You place it in the cabinet with the others. No one speaks. Some women in the ward are nurses, but many are not. They are mothers, sisters, girls who used to work in dress shops and libraries. Now they learn to clean wounds, change sheets, soothe fevers. You see strength in quiet places. One nurse hums lullabies while dressing burns. Another carries a pouch of lavender and leaves it beneath each man's pillow. You stitch buttons onto uniforms no one will wear again, just because it makes them look whole. It's the illusion that helps. Sometimes illusion is all you have. On a bitter March morning, the convoy comes in from France. Too many stretchers. Not enough beds. The doctors move quickly. The nurses quicker. You run for water, towels, disinfectant. You carry trays, fetch lists. Keep the hallways clear. You feel your own heartbeat like a drum behind your ribs. But your hands don't shake. Not anymore. When the chaos settles, you sit on a bench in the corridor and watch the lights shift on the tiled floor. The world keeps turning, even when it shouldn't. That night, Elsbeth hands you a mug of tea. "I saw you," she says. "You didn't blink once today. You don't know how to reply. So you say, 'Neither did you.'" She smiles. For the first time, you go home smelling of medicine and exhaustion. Your apron is stained. Your shoulders ache. But something in you feels grounded, like your feet have found the floor again. You wash your hands slowly. You keep your touch light, even with the soap, as if your hands still remember what they held, and whom they held it for. You write a letter that evening, not to anyone in particular, just to hold the words outside your head. They suffer so quietly. I used to think courage was loud. I don't anymore. You don't sign it. You fold it and place it under your pillow. You sleep and dream of soft voices and the smell of lavender. You never planned to become an expert in waiting. But here you are, and you are not alone. The war created a new kind of widow, the kind without certainty. No funeral, no final letter, no folded flag. Just the silence of absence, the unbearable weight of missing. They call it MIA, missing in action. A tidy phrase that means everything and nothing. You hear it first from Judith Marsh, a woman 2 doors down. Her husband's plane went down over the channel. The report said, "Presumed downed. No wreckage recovered." That was 11 months ago. She still leaves the porch light on. It starts with a club of sorts, though none of you would call it that. A gathering. Quiet. Not advertised. You meet in the back room of the bakery on Tuesdays. It began with 2 or 3, then 5, then 9. Now, 12 women sit around a long wooden table with cups of weak tea, hands folded in laps, backs straight. Some speak, some just sit, but all of you wait. Judith brings a folder each week. Inside it, clippings, articles, scraps of information from every paper she can get her hands on. Flight patterns, weather charts, maps. It looks like madness, but it's love. She once traced an entire coastline with a red pencil, trying to follow a whisper she'd overheard from a former mechanic. She marked places her husband might have landed. You all looked at it, nodding, even though none of you believed in it. Still, you let her believe, because what else is there? Another woman, Francesca, speaks only in verbs. He was walking, he was writing, he was climbing, never in past tense. You don't correct her. She once brought in a letter he'd sent from Alexandria, months before he vanished. She read it aloud. Then she tucked it back into her purse and didn't say a word for the rest of the meeting. The youngest, Vera, is barely 20. Her fiancé was in a tank battalion lost in Belgium. She shows you a photo, sometimes a boy with crooked teeth and kind eyes. "I think I saw him in a dream," she says once. You nod. "What did he say?" He said, keep the kettle on. Asadu. You both laugh. You both cry. No one comments. You never bring up your own loss. You haven't told the others about George's cousin, Henry, and his telegram. About the last letter, or the way you folded it 3 times before you could read it without trembling. You haven't said his name in this group. Not even once. Because what you carry isn't just grief. It's the responsibility of memory. If you speak it too soon, you're afraid it will vanish. One Tuesday, Judith doesn't come. You all sit a little straighter. You stir your tea slower. The door doesn't open. When you go to her house later, she answers in a robe. Her face pale. They sent me a letter. She says, you reach out. She doesn't need to show you. You already know what it says. The next Tuesday, she returns. Her folder is gone. In its place, a scarf she's knitting. I thought I'd try to make something new, she says quietly. You all nod, even if your hands still clutch the past. Some weeks, you talk about rationing or recipes. You trade ideas for dried milk and how to stretch one egg into 4 meals. You complain about soap and stockings and coal. And for a moment, it almost feels like a normal gathering. But the air is always heavier than the words. Because you all know what you're not saying. You've grown used to the stillness. The kind that lives in rooms where women hold breath for too long. But there are cracks. A woman smiles for the first time in weeks. Another one sings while packing biscuits. Once, someone brings a record player. The sound is scratchy, but real. You all sit and listen, eyes closed, just for a song, just to remember life beyond waiting. A letter arrives for you in April, from a nurse in Calais. She cared for a soldier in a field hospital. He had a name close to George's. She thinks it might have been him. He spoke your name before the fever took him. She apologizes for not knowing more. You read it twice, then place it with the others. You don't tell the group. Not yet. One morning, you open your window and hear a bird singing outside. You haven't noticed birds in a long time. Not because they were gone, but because you stopped listening. You watch the sky for a while. You think, maybe I'll leave the porch light on. Just one more week. The group keeps meeting. Some of you will receive closure. Some never will. But in the spaces between words, in the shared glances and warm tea and letters passed hand to hand, you build something else. A quiet courage. A sisterhood made not of hope, but of endurance. And in this war, sometimes that's more than enough. You don't remember when the danger began to feel normal. It creeps in slowly, first in whispers, then in knocks at odd hours, in messages tucked behind loose bricks, in the small lie you tell to someone you love. The lie that says, I'm just helping at the bakery. I'm just going to fetch some flour. I'll be back before dark. But you're not just fetching flour. You're helping hide a radio. You're smuggling a message. You're part of something so fragile and vast it cannot be spoken aloud. You're in the resistance. Your name is not important. Most who knew it in this work forgot it quickly on purpose. For their safety. For yours. You were a seamstress. Or a grocer's daughter. Or maybe a school teacher. You are someone they'd never suspect. Which is precisely why you were chosen. It started with a knock. Not loud, but not hesitant either. The kind of knock that says, you were expecting this, even if you didn't know it. A man you'd never seen before stood there in a coat 2 sizes too big and shoes that had been resoled 3 times. He asked you for a name you didn't recognize. When you said he had the wrong door, he nodded once and handed you a bundle of laundry. Inside, sewn into the hem of a shirt, was a note. You're needed. Leave the light in the back window on Thursday night. That was all. But you understood. You weren't brave. Not in the way stories describe. You were terrified. But you had long since learned that fear doesn't stop your hands from moving. It doesn't prevent your feet from walking into darkness. It simply becomes another thing you carry, like a satchel or a memory. You left the light on. They trained you quietly. No guns, no drills, just paper, ink, codes, and signals. How to wrap a radio in a shawl to disguise it. How to listen for the click of a false floorboard. How to burn a message in less than 6 seconds. You never thought fire could be so vital, or that your hands would stop trembling when you struck the match. In the resistance, most were not soldiers. They were laundresses and farmers and librarians. Women with mothers and husbands and children. Women who'd lost everything and still chose to risk what little remained. One was named Emily. She rode her bicycle 20 miles a day with false documents stitched into the lining of her saddlebag. She once pedaled through a checkpoint with a pistol hidden beneath a loaf of bread. She smiled at the guard and offered him a piece. He declined. She rode on. Another was Claire. She baked scones that contained codes, typed in minuscule letters on parchment paper and baked inside waxed paper between layers. She made 6 a week, sent 3 to Paris. The others were discarded, just to keep the pattern believable. One day, the bakery burned. She never baked again, but she stayed. You learned to lie without blinking, not out of malice, but necessity. You lied to a soldier who asked why your bicycle had no rear reflector. You lied to a priest who asked why you walked alone at night. You lied to a child who asked why you kept digging in the garden when nothing ever grew there. You told him you were planting hope. He believed you, and maybe, in a way, you weren't lying. The risk never lessened. It only changed shape. Some days, it came as a shadow behind you on the road. Other days, as a scream in the next street. Once, it wore the face of a neighbor, someone you'd shared tea with, who disappeared the week after you passed her a note wrapped in embroidery thread. You don't know what happened to her. You can only hope she burned the message in time. Still, you continued, because every action, no matter how small, cracked the armor of the enemy. A phone number whispered under a breath. A map drawn in ash on a tabletop. A hand signal exchanged across a crowded market. The work was invisible, but it mattered. You never received medals. You couldn't. To be named was to be erased. So you stayed in the background, in silence, even after the war. Many never spoke of what they'd done, not because it wasn't worth telling, but because it had cost too much to remember. Now, when you hear someone say the resistance, you think not of guns or sabotage. You think of a woman with tired eyes and a coat that smelled of bread and ink. You think of a bike leaning against a fence, a scarf in a window, a burnt message in a fireplace, a secret carried like breath. And you remember what it meant to fight, not with weapons, but with will. You were not loud. You were not seen, but you were there, and you endured. You count the months by the growth of your child, not by the radio, not by the news, Not by the mounting headlines or the maps with their moving arrows, but by inches on the doorframe, where small pencil lines mark each milestone. She's 4 now, almost 5, and she asks where her father is. Every time, you choose your words carefully. He's helping the world. She nods, as if that explains it, as if that's enough. You tell yourself it will be. You tell yourself you'll keep her safe. You tell yourself the war can't last much longer. But none of these promises are promises you can keep. There are thousands of you, across cities, towns, quiet farmhouses, women who rock babies and boil kettles and stare too long at empty chairs. The letters stop coming, or they come slowly, or they arrive with red stamps you don't understand until you do. And still, you pack lunches. Still, you kiss scraped knees. Still, you smile at your child as if the world is not falling apart outside your window. Because what choice do you have? You share a flat with another young mother now, Mary, whose husband was stationed in Malta. She hasn't heard from him since October. Her son is smaller than you, and often sick. At night, she wraps him in her coat and hums lullabies that drift through the paper-thin walls. You never speak of the war with her. You speak of porridge, of laundry, of whether the milkman might arrive on time for once. But sometimes your eyes meet across the table, and in the silence between you is everything left unsaid. One afternoon, you find a tin box in the back of the wardrobe. Inside are your husband's old letters, the early ones, full of clumsy spelling and too many exclamation marks. You read them aloud to your daughter. She listens, wide-eyed. Was Daddy brave? You pause. You answer carefully. Yes, but he was also kind. She smiles. That's better. The hardest part isn't the waiting. It's pretending the waiting isn't happening. It's brushing hair while your heart breaks. It's setting a place at the table for someone who isn't there, not because you believe they'll walk in the door, but because not setting it feels worse. It's living in 2 worlds, one with your child, one with your memories and trying not to let them bleed together. There are small kindnesses. The woman at the bakery saves the soft ends of the loaves for your daughter. The butcher lets you trade knitting for bones to make broth. The milkman whistles a silly tune every Thursday just for the children in the street. You cling to these things, because even war cannot reach everything. The air raids come less often now, but still you keep the emergency bag packed. Still you sleep with your shoes nearby. Still your daughter knows how to find the shelter in the dark. You've taught her not to cry when the sirens go off. You've taught her to carry her doll tightly and keep her coat on. Even in her dreams. You wish you hadn't had to. But you did. Some mothers did not have the chance to teach. Some lost their children in the first wave. Some in the last. You pass one in the street. A woman dressed in black who never looks up. You don't speak, but you hold your child's hand tighter. One day, your daughter draws a picture. She shows it to you proudly. A house, a son, a stick figure with long hair beside a smaller one. And far away, another figure half faded. That's Daddy, she says. He's far, but he's coming home. You blink away the sting in your throat. You place the drawing on the mantel. It stays there for years. News finally comes in a brown envelope. Not from him, from the ministry. He's been moved. Alive. Recovering. You read it 3 times before the words settle into meaning. Then you breathe. truly breathe. For the first time in months. But you say nothing to your daughter yet. You don't want to break her heart again if something changes. You'll wait until the letter has a return address. You'll wait for his handwriting. You've grown so good at waiting. One morning, she wakes early and climbs into your lap. Will the war ever end? She whispers. You wrap your arms around her. Yes. You say, it must. She closes her eyes, and you hold her. Not because it makes the war disappear, but because it reminds you both of what still exists. Love, warmth, and the promise of peace, whispered in the quiet space between mother and child. The war took the men, and so the women picked up the tools. They didn't ask if they were ready. They didn't wait to be trained. They simply stepped into the spaces left behind, rolled up their sleeves, and made things work. It began with uniforms, women mending, cutting, sewing, then boots, then ammunition, then aircraft parts, bolts, rivets, oil, smoke. You were one of them. You didn't start out thinking you'd belong in a factory. But when the notice was pinned outside the general store, help wanted, essential work for victory, you signed your name with steady hands. You hadn't driven a nail before. Now you're learning to rivet a wing. Your first day at the munitions plant is loud, confusing, and hotter than you expect. The machines are taller than most men you've known. The smell of grease clings to your clothes before lunch. But you meet Mabel. They're an older woman with thick arms and a grin that stays, even through the noise. She shows you how to grip the wrench properly, how to keep your braid tucked under your cap, and how to spot a weak weld before it fails. Machines are like men. She laughs. They break down faster than they admit. You don't know whether to laugh, but you do. It helps. You've heard of munitionettes, women in explosives, factories whose skin turned yellow from TNT. Their bodies were worn from the inside out, their lungs lined with danger. You're not working with powder, but still you feel the cost. Your hands are raw. Your back aches. You return home with grime in your ears and the thud of pistons still echoing in your skull. But you keep going because you know, somewhere across the water, your labor is giving someone a chance to come home. You see posters in the break room, smiling women with slogans. She's doing her part. We can do it. Women of steel for victory. But the real work isn't on the posters. It's in the silence between hammer strokes. It's in the look two women share when a piece falls out of alignment and both know how to fix it. It's in the sweat that runs down your back as you hold a heavy panel in place just long enough for it to be sealed. There's no glory in it, just grit and purpose. Outside the factories, other women take to the fields. The land girls. They call them. You visit a cousin who joined. She used to work in a bookshop. Now she's mending fences, milking cows, guiding tractors across torn earth. Her hands are nicked from thorn, her face sunburnt and streaked with dirt. But she smiles more than she ever did among shelves and ink. There's something clean about this kind of work, she says. Even with all the mess, you help her for the day hauling sacks of seed, chasing down a stubborn pig, laughing until your legs give way. That night, you sleep beside her under rough blankets in a cold loft. You wake to the sound of roosters and wonder why the world never seemed so alive before the war. Not all men approve. Some scoff at the sight of women in trousers. with oil on their hands and confidence in their eyes. But the factories need planes. The fields need crops. And so, the women stay. You meet Edith one week, an engineer from university, who now supervises a section of the plant. She's sharp, calm, and unafraid to correct a foreman. Precision is not just for men, she says, and mistakes kill. You like her instantly. You watch how she moves through the noise with ease, how she checks your work not to find fault, but to help. She makes you better, not by demanding more, but by showing you what you're capable of. You didn't think you'd admire a woman in coveralls with a slide rule in her pocket. But you do. War changes things. It makes you stronger and wearier. You no longer flinch when the horn sounds. You no longer feel shy about your calloused hands. You've forgotten the last time you wore your favorite dress. You're proud of what you've built, even if it's something meant to survive fire, even if no one ever knows your name. One evening, the line shuts down early. An announcement is made. A bomber squadron returns safely from a mission, thanks to structural improvements made in your plant. You and the others exchange glances. No cheering, just the quiet knowledge that what you did mattered. It's enough. Later, when peace comes, some will ask you to step aside, to give the jobs back, to return to dresses and silence. Some will expect you to forget the work you did, but you won't, because the memory lives in your fingers, in your spine, in your voice when you say, calmly and without apology, I was there. I built that. I mattered. At first, they were just pages, pale cream envelopes, creased and smudged by rain and fingers, postmarks blurred, ink running slightly where the paper had soaked in transit. Folded so many times they felt soft at the edges, like cloth instead of paper. But over time, they became lifelines. You weren't the only one. All across the world, women waited by doorsteps, strained to hear the postman's whistle, sat up late rereading phrases that arrived weeks, even months after they were written. In va, time distorts, but letters try to hold it together. You remember the first one you sent, just after he left for training. You chose your words carefully, the way you might pack a suitcase, neatly, lovingly, with an eye toward space and weight. You wrote about the garden, about his dog refusing to sleep in the shed, about the neighbor who started keeping chickens. You didn't write about the fear, about the way your hands shook as you sealed the envelope. You tucked a pressed violet inside. When he finally wrote back, he mentioned it first, smashed flat, but still purple, like it's trying. You kept that sentence tucked into your apron for weeks. Not every woman was writing to a husband. Some wrote to sons, some to brothers, some to friends who had vanished into the fog of foreign names: Tripoli, Salerno, Kursk, Burma. There was one woman in your town who wrote a letter every week to a fiancé whose name hadn't been on a roster since 1942. She never heard back. But she kept writing, she said. I send them because he knew me best when I wrote. Censorship was always there. Redacted words, blank spaces. Phrases like somewhere in France or I can't say where became common. You learn to read around the silence, to feel the meaning between the words. It's cold at night. He's in the north. I met someone who reminds me of your uncle. He's seen something painful. I dreamt of your bread pudding. He misses home more than he'll admit. The unsaid was sometimes the most important part. You began helping others write. At the church hall, then in the canteen, women who couldn't find the words, or who feared that theirs were not good enough. "I don't know what to say," one whispered. "What if it's the last thing he reads?" You guided her hand, one sentence at a time. The letters didn't need to be eloquent. They just needed to be human. And then there were the children. Small hands writing with oversized pencils. Letters filled with questions and drawings. "Do you still have socks? Do the tanks smell bad? Will you come to my birthday?" Some soldiers wrote back. Some didn't make it back. The mothers kept those answers in drawers and biscuit tins. Paper ghosts of what might have been. Once, you received a letter from a nurse overseas. Not for you. Misdelivered. The envelope was torn. The address unreadable. Inside, a single sheet. She sang until the very end. Please tell her mother. You never found out who she was. But you sat down that night and lit a candle. And you told her, thank you, out loud. Because maybe someone needed to say it. In the later years of the war, when paper was scarce and stamps rationed, people began using thinner sheets, writing between lines, in margins, over and under and sideways. You became fluent in this labyrinth of care. Even the postmen developed a reverence. Rainy days saw them shielding envelopes with their own jackets, because they weren't delivering letters. They were delivering pieces of someone's soul. There was one letter you couldn't open right away. A red stamp on the outside. Official. Clean. You recognized the hand. His. But when you held it, you could feel it was different. You waited a full day before slicing it open with the edge of a kitchen knife. Inside, fewer words than usual. But his handwriting still crooked at the end. I saw a child today who reminded me of us. I don't know what's left of the world, but I know I still love you in it. You didn't cry. Not until you smelled the envelope again, and it still smelled faintly of pine. You kept every letter, tied in blue string, in a tin under the bed. Even now, you take them out sometimes not to read the words, but to feel the weight of them in your hand. The weight of love that crossed continents and chaos. The weight of voices that refused to vanish. You think often of the woman who said letters made her feel known. Not seen, but known. You understand that now. The war changed the world. But the letters kept something human inside the storm. A flicker of warmth. A trace of home. Not every front line had trenches. Some were drawn in kitchens, in ration books, in community queues that curled down streets, filled with women balancing shopping lists they couldn't fulfill and meals they couldn't quite imagine yet. This was your war now, fought not with rifles, but with restraint, not with medals, but with mud on your boots and endless substitutions for eggs. You didn't wear uniform, but you still followed rules, adapted, endured. You fought for dignity over scraps, and that too was courage. It began with the shortages. Sugar vanished first, then butter, then meat. Your cupboard grew quiet, the tins more spaced out. You learned the trick of filling plates with air and hope, of layering potatoes into things that weren't quite dinner, but filled the belly just enough. You stretched one egg over 4 mouths. You watered milk. You learned to do without. You weren't alone. Every woman on your street had their own method. Mrs. Lorne mixed lentils into everything. Said they were the new chicken. You didn't believe her, but you smiled and accepted the lentil pie anyway. Miss Effie, the seamstress, took old curtains and turned them into dresses. She walked with pride. Draped in faded florals once meant for windows. We're all a bit see-through now. She laughed once, brushing lint from her hem. You laughed too, because the only other option was crying. The ration book became as sacred as the Bible. You checked it daily, counted coupons like a priest counts prayers. You taught your children the new rituals, how to be polite in the queue, how not to complain when the jam jar was scraped clean, how to chew slowly to make it last. They learned faster than you expected. Children of war do. You joined a Dig for Victory club. The soil in your back garden had never yielded much before, but suddenly every inch mattered. You planted cabbage, potatoes, carrots, pulled weeds with fingers already sore from laundry. The earth gave you blistered hands and crooked crops. But when the first shoots appeared, you felt something in your chest bloom too. Hope tastes like the first green bean you grow yourself. When clothes ran out, you repaired, patched, donned. When shoes wore thin, you stuffed the soles. When the radio broke, you lived by rumors, and the faces of the women at the market told you everything the news wouldn't. You watched their eyes to know when the bombs had fallen somewhere new, when letters had stopped arriving, when someone had lost someone. No one said it aloud, but you knew. Sometimes you held it together. Sometimes you didn't. You still remember the day you burned the stew. Not because of the stew, but because it was the third week without word from your husband, and your daughter had outgrown her shoes overnight, and you'd run out of candles during the last blackout. You scraped the char from the bottom of the pot with trembling hands. Then you sat on the floor and let the tears fall in silence. No one came. No one needed to. You let the grief wash through like a wave. Then you stood up and swept the floor. Other times, laughter broke through when you least expected it. Like when the neighborhood cat walked into the shelter during an air raid and startled everyone into screaming, then sat down, smug and calm, and began to wash itself. Or when you and Mary tried to make wartime cake from mashed parsnips and black treacle, and ended up with something the consistency of shoe polish. You ate it anyway. The taste didn't matter. The effort did. You'd write notes for your children and tuck them into their coat pockets, just in case. Not because you expected something to happen, but because what if you wanted the last words they heard from you to be full of love? So many women did. So many children never read those notes. But they were written just the same. And yet, even among the constant shortages and sorrow, there was beauty. The night you saw the stars again after a long blackout. The sound of your daughter humming while peeling potatoes. The neighbor who left half a loaf on your doorstep without a word. The way people waved more often, lingered longer, looked each other in the eyes. War took many things, but it couldn't touch kindness. When the war ended, the streets erupted. Flags, bells, music, tears. You celebrated too, but in a quieter way. You washed your daughter's hair. You made a stew from everything left in the pantry. You lit a single candle and placed it in the window. Then you sat beside it and whispered to yourself. You made it. You endured. And you let the silence hold you like a warm blanket. Peace did not arrive with trumpets. It crept in, one uncertain footstep at a time. After years of sirens and ration books, of telegrams and teacups, of whispered prayers and hollow doorways, peace felt too quiet, as though the world had forgotten how to breathe without holding its breath. You thought joy would be louder, but instead, it was stillness. Stillness and something else. Something you didn't yet have a word for. You remember the day the war officially ended. People shouted in the streets, clutched each other, danced in circles, cried into their sleeves. Union Jacks waved from windows. Children banged pots and pans. Strangers kissed in the open air. You stood at your doorstep, watching it all. Your daughter held your hand. She looked up at you and asked, "Is it really over?" You didn't know how to answer, because even though the war was over, something inside you still echoed with it. The men returned. Some of them, some were whole, some weren't, some didn't recognize themselves anymore, or their wives, or their children. And you, like so many women, had changed too. You'd managed the home, run the farm, repaired engines, delivered mail, kept communities from falling apart. And now the world expected you to slip back into old patterns, as if courage could be folded and put away like a uniform no longer needed. You tried, but something in you refused. You weren't loud about it. You just didn't vanish. Your husband returned that autumn, thinner, quieter, with eyes that sometimes looked far past you, but he smiled when he saw your daughter. You stood there, heart full and afraid, and when he reached for your hand, you finally allowed yourself to believe it. The war was no longer a future. It was now a memory. But memories live long. The letters, bundled and yellowing, still sat in the tin box. The factory calluses didn't fade for months. The garden grew again, but you still planted more than you needed, just in case. And in your sleep, you still listened for sirens. You kept in touch with some of the women. Elsbeth wrote from Vienna. She opened a clinic, said the war made her sharper, and that now she taught younger nurses never to look away. Judith moved away after her final letter came. She wrote you, "Once I still leave the porch light on. Not for him anymore, but because I like the feeling of someone finding their way home." Mary's little boy grew tall. You sent him a scarf for his 12th birthday. You'd knitted it from the same yarn you once wrapped around cans during the worst shortages. The years passed. Peace grew stronger. Children laughed more often. Shops refilled. Music returned to the radio. But you never forgot the quiet roles women played, never named, never awarded, never written into the headlines. The woman who ran the post station through every blackout. The girl who delivered coded messages with pies. The mother who taught her daughter to smile through the hunger. The wife who waited 12 years to know if he lived. And you who sowed, listened, planted, wept, repaired, and endured. You stood with the others when the memorial was unveiled. Granite, clean and proud. Names carved in perfect rows. You didn't expect to find yours. You didn't. But as the wind blew your coat around your ankles, you felt something deeper than recognition. You felt seen, not by the monument, but by the woman standing beside you, by the quiet nod you shared, by the history that lived in your bones. Now, when your granddaughter asks about the war, you don't tell her about generals or battles. You tell her about the queue for bread that stretched around the block, About the day the dog barked just before the bombs fell. About the letter with the violet pressed inside. You tell her that courage doesn't always shout. Sometimes it's a woman picking cabbage from frozen ground, whispering songs to a baby while the sky shakes above her. Sometimes it's continuing, simply continuing. One morning, many years later, you step into your garden and see the violet bush blooming again. You kneel, press a hand to the earth, and close your eyes. You are old now, but you remember every inch of what you carried. And in this quiet, ordinary moment, you feel it. Not sorrow, not even pride. Just peace, real peace. The kind women like you made possible. The kind built in silence